I am so excited to welcome you not only to Jacksonville, but to the launching of the podcast called The Covenant, more specifically, the Sister Covenant. And yes, I did say sister. What is the covenant, the Sister Covenant? It is a circle of friends, my friends for 20, 30, 40 plus years, your friends, all of our friends, coming together in a safe space at a time such as this. We as women of color, we are counted on to nurture our families, our children, our significant others, our spouses, our community, our corporate boardrooms, and everything in between. But who fills our cup? I think about flying, and when we get ready to take off, what is said to us first? Put your oxygen mask on first before you can assist others. And that exactly is what the Sister Covenant is all about. A safe space to encourage, to listen, to cry a little, laugh a lot, but most important, to empower and to fill our cup. Good morning. Great Sunday morning and happy July 4th. We are at podcast number 20, the 20th episode of the Sister Covenant. To God be the glory. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us and staying with us over the last 8 months of this journey. We have more hills to climb, and we have more empowerment to make sure we are all collectively arriving at the same time. We have a powerful, powerful panel discussion today about topics, some of which we've seen in the media, most recently racism, but also those that we've not talked about and are a little taboo to our culture, like classism and colorism. We're going to unpack all the isms, including sexism, in the next 2 podcasts of the Sister Covenant. But before we get there, we want to thank you, as always, for supporting us in your purchasing and your wearing the Sister Covenant apparel. If you've not yet purchased your Sister Covenant merchandise, it's not too late. Please go to our website, thesistercovenant.com, click on apparel, and you can purchase any of that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful merchandise. As you know, if you spend over $100, your purchase will go towards UNCF Emergency Fund, which is still so needed by our college students of color all across the United States. We also want to thank you for being a part of the Sister Covenant contest. So we want to go over the rules so that you can be a part of the giveaway. And the rules are sharing our latest Facebook stream, like the one from June 20th that was so powerful, and the one from June 6th about grief and loss, love letters from mom, morning to morning. Subscribe to the Sister Covenant on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Join our email list on our website. Comment done on that image, which is posted on the Saturday before the Sunday stream. It is just that simple. Now, who is our winner for the July 4th podcast? Drum roll, please. Yay! Chris Smith. I will certainly be reaching out to Chris, and I know she has all of the Sister Covenant apparel, but we will find out what it is she may not have and certainly get that to her. So thank you so much, Chris, for your continued support of the Sister Covenant. So join us in the after conversation, the Sister Circle. Join us for powerful conversation by opening Facebook on your phone or your computer. Search the Sister Covenant, find the groups tab, click on the group title, the Sister Circle, and join the group. It's just that simple. We will have more incentives for you to be a part of the Sister Circle private group. So now, I have the pleasure of introducing some phenomenal women in academia, women that have the titles, have the degrees, but have the heart for this conversation around racism, sexism, classism, colorism, and eradicating all of the isms that keep us oppressed as people, as women of color. So I would like to introduce them to you. Dr. Kimberly Allen. Dr. Allen is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and she has been in the trenches around this subject matter for years. She is the CEO of 90 Forward, where that is an organization that engages thousands of citizens around the critical conversations of race and patterned with equal justice initiatives across our communities. Dr. Jamila Holcomb. Dr. Holcomb is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Tallahassee and the owner of Holcomb Consulting and Counseling, LLC. She specializes in individual, family, and trauma counseling. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Antoinette Landore. Dr. Landore is the associate professor and the Millsap Professor of Diversity and Multicultural Studies in the Department of Human Development and Family Science at the University of Missouri. Welcome, welcome, ladies, to the Sister Covenant. Hello, ladies. Ladies, welcome to the Sister Covenant. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Well,
yeah, pretty good.
Well, thank you, ladies. And we have a lot of conversation to have because we are certainly in a place, aren't we? We are certainly in a place in 2021. So I want to give you the opportunity, although we have your bios, I want to give you all the opportunity to tell us who you are, whose you are, and how you got to where you are. So I want to start with Dr. Kimberly Allen from Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Allen, how did you get to where you are? Tell us who Kimberly Allen is.
Well, thank you, Pat, for the invitation and for having me here today. As you said, I'm Kim Allen. I am a Jacksonville native. I went away for a number of years and I went to school with these two fabulous ladies at different points in time to do our doctorate work, University of Georgia, Florida State University. And then came back home and contributed, dedicated myself to service in a number of ways. I, started out in education and education reform, doing data and research for a local nonprofit called the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. And then I transitioned over to the Florida Blue Foundation, doing data work and analytics and corporate social responsibility data and analytics work. And all the while I have been volunteering with an organization called 90 Forward. We received funding recently to hire full-time staff, and I transitioned from the board chair to the CEO. And so I've been in that role now for just about 6 months as the CEO, but I've been involved with the organization since 2016. And 90 Forward is an organization that's committed to helping end racism so that everyone thrives. And we do that by helping folks, people, organizations, companies, churches, synagogues, you name it. We want to help any and everybody have conversations about race and racism and its impacts on people in the community and communities of color. We do that through a number of ways, including our award-winning race cards, which is literally a deck of cards that have discussion questions on each side that allow people to have conversations about race. And we do it to the end of helping people to build relationships with each other and ultimately leading towards collective action. We do advocacy work around the city and as of late around the state. We also release research studies around the state of communities of color in our city. We also host community forums as well to get the perspectives and the stories of different people in the community who are impacted by race and racism.
Wow. And I can tell you, powerful dialogue. So we're going to unpack a lot of that, Dr. Allen. We appreciate you for all that you do, and congratulations on your most recent rise in 90 Forward. Next, Dr. Jamila Holcomb, all the way from Tallahassee, my stomping ground. So Dr. Holcomb, tell us, who is Jamila Holcomb?
Well, thanks, Pat, for having me. I wish I was from Tallahassee, Florida, but this is currently where I live. I have lived all over the world, which has provided a really unique perspective to me personally, but also to my work that I do. I was originally born in Anchorage, Alaska, so that's where I'm from. But yes, living in Florida now, having gone to Florida State for my doctorate. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, so therapy is my training and my biggest passion, but I also am a teaching faculty at Florida State University in their Human Development and Family Sciences department. So I also teach undergrads in, those who are interested in this field as well. So with my therapy, since that is my primary passion, my goal has been to heal trauma. And so I would say that I specialize in trauma work. And most recently, I've taken it upon myself to learn about how I heal racial trauma within the therapeutic space. So within my therapy, I specialize in that. And I also do trainings and consultations, mainly to mental health professionals and educators on how we can heal racial trauma collectively. So I'm looking more as an individual perspective, with my work, with my clients, but also as a community, how can we make sure that we're on the same page and on the same healing journey together? And so, that's through my therapy work, but through my education, through my work in academia, I really strive to instill these anti-racist values in the students that I have so that they can, advocate for our communities moving forward in their careers. So that's my work. I'm really passionate about it, and I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holcomb. And I can tell you, I'll speak for my own self as a mom. I know when we had an opportunity to talk and I shared with you the birth of the sister covenant, it was because of all the noise. It was because of where we were starting back last May up until a very traumatic election. And my thoughts at that time was, my gosh, this is going to get worse before it gets better. And then January 6th happened. Who could have predicted? No one would have ever predicted that we would have gone through any more than what we did back in May when we saw a man, snuffed out his life with someone's knee on his neck for over 9 minutes. No, it couldn't have gotten any worse. But then we lived through the last 6 months and it did get worse indeed. So we thank you for what it is you do. And I'm sure many of us could utilize your services, including this mother of 2 young men on college campuses, one of which is at Florida State.
Oh, thanks.
Now as we speak. So thank you for that. And we're going to come back and talk a lot about what it is you do and how we can advance and elevate that. And last but not least, Dr. Landore, Antoinette Landore, thank you so much for being with us today. And tell us, who is Dr. Landore and what do you bring to this conversation this evening?
Yeah, so definitely thanks for inviting me. Hello to the audience out there. How are you all doing? So again, I'm Antoinette Landore. I am an associate professor and Millsap professor for diversity and multicultural studies at the University of Missouri. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about is being part of this conversation to talk about these intersections, and we'll definitely get into it a little later. So my work is really looking at these intersections. My research focuses on how racism and colorism, right? So that's discrimination based on your skin tone. So I focus on how that impacts romantic relationships, how it impacts how families parent their children, and also how it impacts our health outcomes, things like self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and the like. And I'm actually a co-founder of the Center for Body Image Research and Policy, and as part of our center, one of the things that we focus on is not just looking at body image in terms of weight and height, but that skin tone, as well as other phenotypic characteristics play a role in how we all look at ourselves and think of our bodies, right? And so one of the interesting stories for me is that I grew up in Southern Louisiana, and if you've ever been to Southern Louisiana, you know it's a whole lot of Cajuns and Creoles. And so for me, my research really birthed out of my own experience of being a light-skinned Black woman in Southern Louisiana. And I can talk about some of those stories too, because I always noticed that I received privilege, for sure, from teachers, from community members across the board, whether they were Black or white or any other race. And I received more privilege than many of my darker skinned peers. And I always thought that this was an interesting thing. And when I was much younger, of course, there was not a whole lot of research done in terms of looking at this area, but I knew that there are so many questions that I was interested in asking about this. And so my work now is asking these questions and trying to figure out, most importantly, how are we going to eradicate not just racism, but colorism as well.
Wow. So you just said a lot, and we're going to get to every single aspect and more of what you said, Dr. Landore. So let's get started. Dr. Allen, I'll start with you. How did we get here? We've talked a little bit about the last 12 months, everything from George Floyd to the insurrection of January 6th to, we could call the role of all the individuals. And it's almost numbing in a sense that there's so many lives that we could probably call the roll on, that some of which we've probably even forgotten because now it's so I don't ever want to make it normal. It's never normal, but it's so common. It happens so frequently these days. Emmett Till happened 50 years ago, and we can remember that, but so many have happened over the last 5 or 6 years. It's kind of a blur, right? But we know the last 12 months, the trauma, as you indicated, Dr. Holcomb, has just been constant. Before we can even take a breath, it's been more. So how did we get here with the isms of what we are talking about today in your estimation?
Well, honestly, Pat, it was long before, unfortunately, even Emmett Till. We got here because of the transatlantic slave trade, the notion of wanting to identify people and characterize people based on the color of their skin, and by attributing certain characteristics, personality traits based on said things. I was a part of a conversation probably now about 5 or 6 months ago. And the professor at Edward Waters College here talked about how typically people were identified by where they came from. So, you might be Nigerian, or you might be Kenyan. So it was intentionally about where you came from, because people wanted to assign origin to you. But then when we came to America, it was less about the where you came from, and it became more about stripping away some of the identity that was there in order to indoctrinate people who were brought here as slaves around, and give them the culture, right? And give them the servitude, stripping away of their culture in order to adopt what was more acceptable, and to create a hierarchy. Quite honestly, a hierarchy of better than, or this group is better than, or this group is less than. So it started a long time ago. And I would agree with you that because now we have things like video and we see it more often, we are becoming desensitized in some ways. I personally have not, because I watch these videos to remind myself that these are not just, this is not another name, this is not another hashtag, but in general, that trauma is relived, and it's been handed down through genetics for, generations. And so we are seeing these things, and I talk a little bit about the work we do with the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project and memorializing victims of terror lynchings. That happened, right? There were postcards of lynchings that were sent around. So unfortunately, this isn't even close to new, not even in the last 12 months. And there is the unfortunate, because it happens so frequently, that we can become desensitized. Some names we know, and some we've never known, and some we will never know.
So when you hear individuals that may not share exactly the same view, see it different, and they indicate, well, what about other people who have been maybe killed, and we don't highlight those people. You've even had folks compare auto accidents. We don't talk about those people. Why are we focused so on this aspect of the unfortunate? I don't think anyone has said it's not unfortunate, but why are we so focused on what we've seen happen over the many years, the hundreds of years?
Right, because the thing that underlies it is the intention of racism or bias that underlies all of those sorts of killings. When most often when folks are reaching out, they say, well, what about Black on Black crime? And what I say is, when we talk about homicide in general, right? It tends to be about proximity and who you're close to. And we tend to be in relationship or confrontation with people who are closest to us. That can be family members, friends, or people who tend to look like us. And so Black on Black crime is white on white crime, is Hispanic on Hispanic crime. But the point that we tend to focus on in the work when we're talking about race and racism and the role that it plays in people's losing their lives is when we're encountering police or law enforcement, or when we're encountering citizens who have been deputized in some way, and they are white, and it is a person of color on the other end. Those tend not to end well for the person who is being targeted. Those individuals, Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian people, tend to have a higher rate or instances where they might lose their life in those interactions. And that's, that's a separate category unto itself.
I want to unpack that, and I want to get Dr. Holcomb in this conversation as we've talked about the trauma that we've all experienced. Some of us react and deal with it differently, and you have the opportunity to maybe talk to younger people and families, and you're in a college town. Tell us about what Dr. Allen just alluded to as it relates to authority figures, the police, and the fear, quite frankly. And I'll just say, and the audience knows, I've shared this before. I have two young men that are college age, one of which just graduated, so I can't say two college students, but two young African-American men. And I was petrified and scared. My youngest came home two nights after Floyd with a do-rag on his head. And we know what that is and the perception of what that may be. So he had his hoodie on so that that wouldn't be showed, because he knew he couldn't just walk around and let me see him with the do-rag. But when he came through the door that night at 8:00 from Tallahassee, I was upset. I said, you will not do that, because if you get stopped by police, they're not potentially going to know that you are a finance major with a 3.7 GPA and all of these accolades. They may just see you as a threat. And if it goes sideways because you don't conform or you ask too many questions because we taught them to advocate for themselves, that may not go well for you. So again, trauma, I'm kind of transferring my baggage onto him, and I'm making him fearful too, probably. Talk to us about what we've seen around the whole defund police. And is that what we really want, or is it just a reaction to where we are?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot there, because you're certainly talking about like a trauma response. And I want to get there too, but you're also speaking about what's called racial socialization. So those are the conversations that families of color have with their children to prepare them for potential discrimination experiences, to prepare them for interactions with the police. So all of those, conversations that you've had with your son and that many of us have with our family members and with our children is in an effort to keep them safe, in an effort to protect them, and an effort to make sure that they come home alive. And a lot of what we see in the literature about racial socialization is that it's a very protective strategy. That this is one of the resiliency factors that families of color, Black families, Latinx families have to be able to pass down to their children and protect them from discrimination. It has lots of positive outcomes for kids. It helps increase their racial identity and develop a positive racial identity, which has a lot of protective factors for their mental health. So on one hand, this socialization strategy that has come about because of a trauma response is a protective factor. It's a real strength within communities of color. And so I wanted to highlight that strength first, but I do think what you said initially about the trauma is important because that's where it's coming from, right? So we've been through so many traumatic experiences for centuries. As Dr. Allen was talking about, this is nothing new. And so over time, we've had to learn how to cope. And so, you know, the stories of previous generations, our own experiences, the history and legacy of enslavement, your personal experiences with racism, witnessing all of the police brutality that goes viral now, as we've been talking about George Floyd, all of that gets stored in our bodies and gets stored in our memories as a traumatic experience. And so we cope with that in very different ways. In the short term, in terms of coping, a lot of us are probably going to experience more distressing type of symptoms. So we're going to be sad, we're going to be angry, we're going to have nightmares, we're going to not feel safe, we're going to feel anxious in our bodies. We're going to be hypervigilant around law enforcement, around police officers, or around any type of area or, you know, community that doesn't feel safe. Perhaps if you are in a community where you feel as if you are like the only, for instance, not the majority in a community. And so, you know, when we're experiencing trauma in the moment, it's going to be those more like distressing feelings, and we learn to cope with those. We can learn to cope with those. A lot of times, I think what we do is we just like turn off our computers or turn off the TV, or hopefully we have communities of support that we can go to and process these experiences with. But what we don't talk about as much is how the longevity of the trauma, like, you know, gets passed down through generations and generations. And so that trauma experience and those traumatic experiences pile up and they get stored in our bodies, and we pass them down to generations through our genetics, but also through our stories, right? And so through our fears, through our own just concerns for future generations. And so the trauma gets, you know, it just gets passed down intergenerationally, and it's very difficult for us to get rid of that until we can acknowledge the impacts of racism and really work towards like collective healing. I hope that makes sense. I know that I'm saying a lot here, but I wanted to highlight the resiliency factor, but I also want to acknowledge that it has come about because of this significant trauma that has been passed down historically and intergenerationally. And communities of color have just been so resilient in finding ways to continue to cope and continue to thrive. And so we do have some positive outcomes like ethnic racial socialization, but we also have some negative outcomes as well as a result of the trauma. And, you know, certainly we're going to talk about colorism and internalized racism and, you know, just lingering mental health concerns, lingering physical health concerns. There's a lot of negative impacts that we're having to deal with as a result of this generational trauma.
So, Dr. Landore, when Trayvon Martin was killed by someone that decided he didn't belong in that space, I think, and help me ladies, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think our president at the time, President Obama, said Trayvon Martin could have been my son. And I think what was surmised by that statement was he could have been me. His color, you know, he wasn't maybe what mainstream America had painted as this big, dark, ominous, kind of George Floyd-like character. Because when we've heard about George Floyd over the last 12 months, even during the trial, his size, his stance, his power came into conversation. He was the victim, but somehow it came into a conversation. But Trayvon Martin, not so much. But yet he had the same outcome. My question for you, Dr. Landore, is colorism in the mainstream, but also in our own culture. How does that play a part to all of what we're talking about?
Yeah, so and I'm glad we're talking about colorism in this conversation. I think a lot of the focus this past year has been really conversations around race, right? Race and racism. But colorism is also an ugly friend to racism. And so we know in the US and really all over the world that colorism historically has been around, but even in my contemporary research, we see colorism playing out in how police interact with people of color. It plays out in terms of job prospects and being hired, in terms of marriage likelihood, even in terms of education and how teachers treat their students. And so really in kind of this conversation about policing, we see the same thing, even in sentencing, that darker skinned individuals are more likely to be sentenced and have a more severe prison sentence compared to their lighter skinned peers. And so in some ways, I have argued that I think of perhaps a few decades from now, when you can look at someone and not necessarily know their race, right? The really ambiguous people talk about, right? I can't really tell what their race is, but they're probably Black and mixed with something else, that perhaps race in and of itself may be out of the door because you won't be able to say this person is Black. However, our ugly little friend, colorism, will still be alive and well because you will judge people based on how light or dark they are. And so the same will be the case with policing and all the other examples that I gave. And so this is one of the reasons why I argue it's so important that we continue to talk about colorism, because even as racial mixing is happening across the globe, there will still be some categorization happening, and that people will still make judgments and treat people differently based on the lightness or darkness of their skin.
So ladies, help me. Maybe we need to go back a little. And we're all educated, so this is not to offend or to insult anyone. Racism is a construct. It was, I don't want to say made up, but talk to us a little bit about that, because I then want to go to what you just said, Dr. Landore, about America, but we've had some of our friends in our European country most recently talk to us about the fact that someone is maybe of a different color tone that is saying they were discriminated against within the family, the royal family. So is it just a construct of America, or is this just human beings and categories? So talk to us and educate us, ladies, about the racism and race, the construct of race in general. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead. So yeah, no, I mean, race, you're totally spot on here. That is a social construct, and we know that it changes from generation to generation, right? There was a point in America in which to be Irish American meant something different than what it means now. And so it is definitely a social construct and changes with culture, location, and time. And I think one of the things that we have to recognize, particularly as Americans, is how racism, the conversations around George Floyd spread all over the world, right? And so you saw in Europe and in all parts of the world, folks were protesting, right? People of color, Black folks were also protesting and saying that their experiences are similar to that of Black people in America. And so it is
not by happenstance, because we know that when we think about white supremacy, it's not necessarily just an American issue, that it's really a global thing. I think, Kim, we're going to say something.
Yeah, and honestly, Antoinette, I thought a little bit about your research, but even thinking about, like geishas as an example, right? Who bleach their skin. That is an Asian culture with the lightening of skin. There is something to be said about across the world how the value of lighter or fairer skin has seeped into the cultures across the world as more acceptable. And in addition to that, Black people from Africa were not just transported here or enslaved here in America only. They were dispersed throughout the world. And so the hierarchy, the natural hierarchy that took place from being transplanted from or being taken from your land of culture and familiarity to coming into a place that is not your own, that whatever your culture is or was not acceptable. And so in order to, in some way learn or be accepted, whatever, and I put that in air quotes, is to adapt whatever this culture says is acceptable, is beautiful, is, right. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So Spike Lee was a little ahead of his time back in the early 90s, I believe, or maybe it was the late 80s. I don't remember. There was a little movie called School Days, and we may all remember that. I certainly do. I had just graduated from Florida State University. And we're going to talk about it, ladies. The jigaboos and the wannabes. The good hair and the bad hair. That's within the African American community. If you want to kick us off, Dr. Landore, talking about that, and let's talk about it. Let's roundtable talk about.
Yeah. So let's, right, we're thinking about Spike Lee, but even today, the conversation is around In the Heights. So have you guys heard of this this debate that's going on? In that In the Heights, which is a movie that is coming out on HBO Max, and it is a Afro-Latina movie. And so a lot of the concern about the movie from audience members is that all of the cast are pretty much light-skinned Latino, Afro-Latina actors and actresses. And people are questioning, well, where are the darker skinned folks in this story? And so I think, one of the things that I love to say is that when we talk about racism, colorism, we know racism is alive and well, right? Given kind of what has been going on, and people are more attuned to it. But so is colorism in our media, and In the Heights and the conversation that's happening around that movie is similar to what we saw with Spike Lee, and through the years, when we look at magazines lightening actresses' skin tone. And even when you think about, I wrote a paper about Nina Simone and the conversation and the debate that happened when Zoe Saldana played Nina Simone, and she darkened her skin and even had a prosthetic nose on. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is how colorism is continuing in our lives and continue to impact us. And so we see it within our communities of color, but also across the board, right? And so if you think of the movie that I'm talking about, In the Heights, how many people have, who were the editors behind the scenes, who even were the casting managers, who were hiring folks, and no one noticed, right? That we don't have enough dark-skinned folks, no one noticed, right? And so then the question is, even in woke culture now, that there's still some missing pieces, and we have to acknowledge that and and really make changes, right? If we really want to make changes across the board, it's not just having an all Latino or an all Black cast, but it's also the diversity in your Blackness and diversity in your Latinx-ness.
Dr. Holcomb?
Absolutely. I think I was gonna say, I think it's so important to talk about how, usually when we talk about racism, we talk about, the interpersonal effects of racism. And, we talk about the police brutality or discrimination experiences, but we don't talk about how we, as people of color, have internalized racism as well, and how just this value of whiteness, as we've all been talking about, and this idea of white supremacy, that the closer you are to whiteness, the more valued you are, how that has been internalized within communities of color. And so what happens inevitably over time, and unfortunately this is how successful racism is that it no longer has to be overt forms of oppression from an oppressor to somebody who's oppressed. It can then be internalized by oppressed groups and then perpetuated within communities. So you would think that the person who's initiated the aggression no longer has to be the aggressor anymore, because the victim starts, perpetrating themselves. And so it's this kind of unfortunate dynamic where we've seen over time, communities of color will internalize these values that, darker skin is not beautiful, big noses are not beautiful, big lips are not beautiful, unless they're on white skin, right? And so we've seen this play out time and time again, where it's like, well, if a Black woman has cornrows, that's not professional, but if Kim Kardashian does it, then it's beautiful, right? And so we really, really do need to take a look at how, once we've gotten to this point, as a community, how have we internalized the racism and at this point are perpetuating it within our own communities. And it's not to say any type of blame. That's just how racism is set up. Like, that was the whole goal. And so it's not a blame on oppressed communities. It is kind of what Dr. Landore was saying, is that even though we're in this era of wokeness, that we all have to wake up. We all have to be intentional about learning and unlearning all of the things that we have been perpetuating that are contributing to colorism, that are contributing to internalized racism, and at the end of the day, contributing to white supremacy. So it is a just continual self-evaluation process and community evaluation, and just an unlearning process for all of us, because it just doesn't make logical sense that all of these people would create this movie in the Heights, right? All these people would have a role in this movie and nobody would say, we have no diversity, real diversity in this movie of skin tone, right? But it does make sense when we think about how ingrained racism is and how ingrained white supremacy is, that we wouldn't even think about it unless somebody points it out. And there's so many countless examples of this. And so it is just a constant learning and unlearning process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holcomb. Dr. Allen, so race cards, 9-0 forward, the work that you're doing and you've been doing, how do we have the necessary conversations, not just pointing fingers at them, whoever them are, them can be anybody, but us? How do we own it? We are about empowering women, especially women of color. So not just Black women, not just Latina women, not just Asian American women, but women of color. How do we have the necessary conversations about what we're talking about right here to move this needle? Because we've been talking about it for a minute. This isn't new. As Dr. Landore said, it happened before the 90s. And now everything's kind of chic and it's kind of cool to be Black, right? It's cool to have that card, but do we really feel valued and beautiful internally? And how are we having that conversation, not just with the broader audience, but with ourselves?
I think exactly what you said is right. We have to have the conversation with ourselves. And I think we're having it on a level, right? Like I think as Black women or as women of color, we are talking within group about the Black white dynamic or the Hispanic Latinx white dynamic, right? But to the point of us needing to even talk about what's happening within group and how we have been conditioned, as Dr. Holcomb said, conditioned to internalize the ideas of what are beautiful, what's beauty, what's strength, what's acceptable within our culture. And I think at the heart of all of it is this idea there is a privilege, right? That regardless of what group you belong to, there is some privilege that comes along with that. And some privilege is afforded to some groups. So if we're talking about light skin versus dark skin, right? There is some privilege with a lighter skin than a darker skin. There is privilege with being white versus being Black, Hispanic, Latinx, or Asian. And it's up to us to have the conversations about whatever that privilege comes with and begin to unpack it. And honestly, acknowledge it. I don't think we should hide from the fact that we all have some sort of privilege. The four of us sitting on this call have a certain type of privilege, a certain level of privilege that other women who look like us from where we come from in all different places may not have. Privilege is not a bad thing, but it's what you do with your privilege, right? That really that counts, right? Do you use it to advocate for other people who are not where you are? We're talking about the movie In the Heights. As a lighter skinned Latino or Latinx person in that film, did you recognize that you had the privilege of being in this film because your skin was fair? Did you advocate for darker skinned Hispanic or Latinx folks? And we don't know that, right? Somebody may have raised it and they might have just been like, oh no, we're gonna go with it, right? But that's why representation is so important. That's why privilege is important, because sometimes the person with the privilege is the one who folks will listen to. If I come in and say, hey, you know what? I didn't really get a fair shake at X, Y, or Z. And it coming from me, it might not be accepted. But perhaps there is an Antoinette there, or perhaps there is a Pat there, or perhaps there is a Jamila there who can say, hey, you know what? She really didn't get a fair shake. And so I'm going to use my privilege in this space to highlight that someone else will listen to. And I think that's the conversation that we should have, is how can we each lean into the privilege we have, and not to strip it away. I don't think anybody wants to strip it away, but how do we use the privilege we have coupled with the power that we have, right? And how do we combine that power to make lasting impact? But that has to come with some real honest and transparent conversations about where the privilege lies, who has it that knows they have it and they're not using it the way that it should be used, who has it and they don't recognize that they have it and just need to be taught how to use it, and who just is, has it and they don't care and they'll never use it, right? Because there are those folks too. But for the folks who are willing to come to the table and have the conversation, it's up to us to talk about it.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing woman doing amazing work. And together, we're going to make the difference. We're stronger together. I am so very excited today to speak with a new friend that I have made, Dr. Mai Keasley. Dr. Kingsley, and I affectionately call her Dr. Mai, is the founder of the Duval Democratic Asian Pacific Caucus, and she is an educator for the last 30 years with Duval County Public Schools. Good morning, Dr. Mai.
Good morning, Pat. How are you? Thank you for being my new friend.
Thank you for coming and gracing us here at the Sister Covenant. We are so excited to sit down and talk and just kind of, have conversation about where we are. Over the last year, 15 months, we've seen a lot and heard a lot in the media. And we've had some definite rhetoric that has been hateful and hurtful to many people. And the Asian American community has been right in the center of that. How did we get here, Dr. Mai? Has it just been because of the COVID-19 pandemic? Is that where we got started with all of this? How do we get where we are today?
Well, I think that if we look at the American history, we can kind of recognize that Asian American has always been somehow, excluded with various, things that I will kind of talk with you a little bit later on, and think about different laws that have been enacted at the state level. At the federal level to somehow set it apart from each other. And sometimes even, our history had taught us that we are very good about pitting one Asian group against another. So I think, over time, it's, the history of racism against Asian Americans is there. But that so very, very blatantly display of racism and hate towards Asian Americans is when the pandemic started, as you alluded, at the introduction that you just made, and so think about in the last 15 months at the national level, starting with our president, with the national leader of this free world, this great democracy that somehow gone around and call the pandemic as China virus, the Chinese flu, the Kung Fu flu, all of those rhetorics that is so hurtful. And so think about, the community out there who's really figuring it out, who is Vietnamese, who is Chinese, and who is Japanese, right? So when we are walking on the street with the rhetoric coming down at the Asian American, who is to know which group is Chinese and which group is Filipino? So we all lump in together, and think about how sometimes it may not personally affected us, but all of that hate and the violence that kind of directed at us in the past 15 months, you can't help but feel and taste it on your mouth when you go outside. And so all of that, think about how my family members, we talked about how when they went to work at the nail salon, they were fearful of asking people to put their mask on when they were allowed to work. And that was months after, we were locked down, and they were fearful because they did not know, what to do, because sometimes you see members of our society, they know they're supposed to wear a mask, but they didn't. So my family members and my community members are afraid to even ask them, because they were afraid of being blamed for or yelled at for being too outspoken against them. Who are you to tell us to put the mask on? And then who are you to dare to say these kind or correct us in our manner? This is our freedom, right? And so that kind of aggressiveness against our Asian American, and sometimes my family members even suggested that. They said, oh, wait a minute, we are not Chinese, so don't hate us, right? But the thing is, you are forced in a corner to say that so that the hate is not directed at you. But at the same time, that kind of mentality force the Vietnamese different groups kind of fight against the other group, isolate, each other so that we will not be blamed, and I think it's kind of a sad thing that we are doing that to ourselves. And then we even, my mother even reminded us sometimes, saying that this is uncertain times, unprecedented time. You all have to be very careful. Things are very unpredictable. So make sure you go out, when you go out, look around you. Now, we are all 40s, 50s, and 60s even. And she are reminding us to do that. She never had to do that, to us. Because my mom said that, don't forget, they don't know you are Vietnamese. They might think you are someone else, and they just shove you from behind, like what we see in TV, at the national level. And then I even have students that share with me about their mother reminding the siblings, when you go out, please be careful, look around, know where you are, know where you are going, so that you can protect yourself just in case someone hurt you. And then some students even said that when they are at school online with me, they are worried about their mom. They're not too worried about their fathers, but they worry about their mother, going to work or going to the grocery store. Are someone going to hurt them? Yeah, and they said they never felt like that, And then some of my students said that they may not be directed, these hate crimes may not be affected them personally, but that they felt, they are personally attacked because they are Asian American. So, so sometimes, for me, I think that one time I was going to the local grocery store here. I was asking this man about a meat cut, and the man was just coming at me. He was so mad. He literally lied to me. He said, "No, we don't do that here." And then I think that he may have thought that I did not speak enough English. And then later on, as I was walking away, and then he saw my husband walking with me, and I was talking to him, and said, "I'm going to share this to the customer service at the front." And then the man came back out and was just calling out my name and tried to fix the problems. But then when I could not hear what he was saying to me, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I can you repeat? I did not hear what you are saying." Oh my gosh, he went ballistic on me, and he would just literally kind of yelling at me. He said, "So I do not speak enough good enough English for you?" And he was just mad at me. And I could feel the rage in him. And so I back away very fast and just kind of give me a safe space away from him. And I walked away, and I had to report it, because to me, I guess I have to enact on it and report, because I don't want my students, my family members, and other people, who may not have enough English or the command of the language to counter that kind of rage that unnecessarily directed at them, So that was my experience and the anxiety level of things that I felt this year. And then, and the people in my family and my students share with me this year that I have never had that kind of experience before.
Dr. Mai, you've said so much that I really want to unpack. But one of the things that struck me most, and my audience knows this, is the feeling. I have 2 young adult sons that I shared with you when we spoke are of mixed heritage. Their grandmother, my husband's mother, is from Okinawa. So my sons obviously are Black and some percentage of Japanese, and my mother's father was Caucasian. So I affectionately refer to them as the little United Nations of background. But why that's important is, as people, as citizens, all of these United States, we call this home. And this is our home, for good or bad, to make it better, right? We shouldn't have to feel in fear of who we are because we came to this country, whether you came 50 years ago or whether you came 400 years ago, as it was in my ancestors. But still, my sons, during the George Floyd situation, I was fearful that they would be traveling back and forth from college towns to home, and I was fearful for them. And that's what I heard you say. Your mother, at your age, probably a little older than my college-age sons, right? She was fearful for you because of the hate crimes that have occurred across our country. So how have you and other Asian Americans, regardless of your background, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese in your case, how have you come together to hopefully help this situation?
I think that, at the start, it's always the conversations at the table, the dinner table, where we intimately share our anxiety, our feelings of somehow being scapegoated, or sometimes maybe just trying to understand, unpacking of what's going on around us, as we are still busy, me teaching, in being the front line, in person and online at the same time, and my family members who are working in the nail industry and some other in the health industries, and so when we talking about all these things that happening around us at our dinner table or in our living room, we share our concerns, and so that we can become more aware of things. And then I also, with my students, I encourage them to talk with each other, talk with their family members, and then if appropriate, talk to the community members. And I think that talking, and sharing with friends at the community level, so that the community members understand the challenges that we are individually experiencing. Sometimes sharing conversations like that, it makes it, I guess, more humanizing to the community members, that it is not just a story that is shared in Chinatown, in New York, or in San Francisco, or in Little Saigon in LA on CNN or some other news outlet like Washington Post. It is make it here. So so what happened is that we make these kind of conversations very current. And I was able to also get with my Asian American organizations here in town, and then got involved with the Asian against Asian hate. It's a rally. It was a rally that was in months planning for that. That happened in April. And then we also had a follow-up on the rally with the town hall meeting at UNF, and also be open-minded to share what you are going through with different organizations. For example, I was asked to talk on the Duval Democratic Party podcast here in town. And so that was broadcasted and share with our viewers, and so that the community members know what to do to help us, and what can we do to also in turn to collaborate, to find solutions with our with our community members and our collaborators. And that's how, one story led to the other, that led me to talk with the 904 ward, locally with Dr. Allen, Kimberly Allen, and then eventually to you, the sister covenant, to the podcast that you are doing today, because sometimes being silent is not enough. And then, when we are on this a podcast like this, or some other some other organization, 904 word, I try to be cognizant about not just me talking, but sharing the stories of other people. But sometimes talking about somebody is not enough. Inviting, my Indian friends, inviting my Chinese friends, inviting my Filipino friends, inviting my Korean friends, all different organizations, because, Asian Americans, it's a very complex, community. It's a very, very diverse diaspora in our city. So, to me, we have to do it like that, because, and I know for my involvement with the community members here in Jacksonville since 1988, I realized that, we have to be friended with our African American, with our Black community friends, that they have been the forefront of activism for the politics of our voice, knowing how to use it, and not for your own voice, but for the voice of other people, for the minoritized groups of people. And not only that, for age groups, for gender groups, and for other able groups, right? And so I think that it's so important. It is so important that we have to work together. Because I think that if we look through our history, our American history, Asian American, understand activism very well, and so I think that that we should somehow, as we are doing this, we first must understand the totality of the dominant narratives there, and the racism in many aspects of our society. And if we don't understand that history, we need to sit back and read about it. And then when we study our history, I think that, Pat, what you have mentioned earlier that I found very profound in is that we once we understand something, we should not just focus on the hate alone. We should focus on the solution. What must we do to move forward, right? So I think that once we identify who we are, who are the people standing around us, did we understand the experiences of the people who have suffered or have experienced the gravest human tragedies, the most painful injustices, and so that to me would have to be the stories of our Black Americans. And without that understanding, we cannot move forward very, very much. We cannot speak in empathy, in deepest understanding of injustices. And so I think from that I can say that I can move forward with songs in my heart and the happiness of the soul to really to work with my other minoritized group of friends. I hope that makes I hope that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense, Dr. Mai, and that's spot on. That's why we're having this conversation, and it cannot be a one and done. It has to be continuous. We have to bring in other backgrounds, our brown sisters from our Hispanic and Latino communities, our Indian communities, certainly our Black sisters, and just like in the Asian American community, our Black sisters don't all come from Africa. Some of them come from the Caribbean. Some of them come from we all arrive at the same time to push each of us and lift us as we move forward. And
Yes.
people like you, Dr. Mai, who've been in the trenches for 30 plus years, for me, and for all of us, we will make a difference because we're stronger together. So I am just so happy that we've had a start to this conversation, but it's not the end. It will be a continuation, because that is how we're going to make change happen. Thank you so much. And you got to promise to come back again, Dr. Mai.
Thank you so much for seeing me, for acknowledging me, and people like me. Thank you. I'd be happy to come back, Ms. Pat. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. What powerful conversations with some amazing women. Wow. You don't want to miss part 2 of taking back our power over the isms: racism, sexism, colorism, and classism on July 18th. Invite all your sisters to the next Sister Covenant. And as always, my sisters, be bold, be brilliant. You are all beautiful and brave, and be blessed. Have a wonderful 4th of July and be safe.